Welcome, everybody, to the Gentle Answers podcast. I'm your host, Jocelyn Rodriguez, and today we have Monica Cline, and she is a former comprehensive sex educator and Title X family planning training manager, trained by the LGBTQ plus community and Planned Parenthood. Her career in HIV prevention, comprehensive sex education, and Title X training management lasted over a decade. However, she learned from her mentors that serving the marginalized meant only meeting them where they're at and leaving them there. It was a combination of this philosophy, her experience in the community, her conversion to Christianity, and her personal story that prompted her to deeply question comprehensive sex education and its impact on the family. And so we are so excited to have her with us today to just dive into some of these topics around, identity and God's best design. And so welcome, Monica.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so great. And so you're in Texas, right?
I am. I'm in Fredericksburg, Texas. It's the Texas Hill Country, or we also call it the heart of Texas. So it's a
Awesome.
very beautiful place. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, yeah, we're so glad to have you.
Mm.
So, yeah, maybe explain a little for listeners, just, I kind of shared it there in the bio, but just a little in your own words of kind of what you were doing, what you saw, and how that kind of led you to create the ministry you've now created.
Yeah, well, so a lot of this, my story is, really impacted by the worldview that I had. And so I was not raised in church. I was not raised to understand who Jesus was. I believed in a Christian God, that there was only one God and he was the God, but I didn't know who he was. I didn't understand. And so not having a solid worldview or biblical worldview, when I went off to college at the University of Texas at Austin, I was very easily molded by my environment, by the culture, very liberal culture at UT Austin. So I definitely just molded right into the culture, accepted many things, went with the flow, didn't know any different. And it was in the 90s, and so the 1990s. And so that was around the same time that people were very aware of HIV infection.
Mm-hmm.
And like most young people, I really wanted to make a difference in the world. I was very concerned about the marginalized. I wanted to reach out to communities that maybe people ignored or the society ignored, and I wanted to care for them and especially to protect them from HIV infection. So I ended up volunteering for a gay organization that was receiving government funding to not only care for people living with HIV, but also to have an like a prevention education team that would go out into high risk, marginalized communities, educate them about the transmission of HIV, how to prevent the transmission, and hopefully, reduce the HIV infections in the area. And so I just consider that a really compassionate, noble thing to do. Um, of course, I was quickly hired. I was very enthusiastic, so I was hired right out of college and became an HIV education specialist. My training came from the CDC. We used a lot of pamphlets from ETR to learn about HIV infection. And so obviously there's more concerns in addition to HIV, there's all the other STDs and unplanned pregnancy as well. So I was educated in all of that. So it's really from a public health standpoint, it's called public health education. And the approach that we were using was sexual risk reduction. And so, in other words, we're not telling people not to have sex. Sexual risk reduction is actually just to continue those behaviors, but reduce your risk by using condoms, lubrication, getting tested for disease, getting treated for those diseases, and telling your sexual partners about that, that they might have contracted the disease as well, and that they need to get tested and treated. And so what most people don't understand is that, I'm speaking about this in a very like public health kind of a conversation, and that is exactly what we did, but it's incredibly graphic. I mean, we talk about every possible sexual activity that could ever be imagined. We were trained to become desensitized to various sexual activities, especially I'm working with both heterosexual and homosexual individuals, whether they identify it that way or not. We looked at everything as behavior. And so I was trained to be completely desensitized to any possible activity because I was told it was very important for me not to become surprised or to show any kind of judgment as I'm talking to someone and they tell me what they're doing. And my job was really to teach them how to reduce their risk. So after a few months of training at this gay organization, I was then told that it was time for me to learn how to teach that same risk reduction education to children. And so they took me to Planned Parenthood. And so here in the United States, Planned Parenthood is our largest abortion provider. And they were just across the street from my office. And so I just walked over there. The director of sex education for the greater Austin area, Austin, Texas area, she became my mentor and gave me one-on-one training on how to share this message with children. So, she laid out the case, Jocelyn, by first telling me, and I think the reason she did this is because most people, when you think, well, why are you going to talk to kids about sex and HIV and all these other things? I mean, they're just little kids. So
Mhm.
she actually started my training by letting me know that girls as young as 9 were coming into their clinic. And she, described some of the cases. They were very extreme cases, very shocking, for girls as young as 9 to be coming in with those kind of situations. And so my first thought was, regardless of my secular worldview, my first thought was, this is abuse. 9-year-old girls should not be having sex. They're not consenting to sex because they're way too young, and obviously this is being forced on them, or they're being coerced, and I'm a victim of sexual abuse when I was a little girl. And so, I also understood that this could be something that they just passively didn't know how to stop. She quickly corrected me and let me know that these girls are not abused, that these girls are consenting, and that they have sexual rights to be sexually active, and that it was our job to teach them how to do it better and safer. Um, and if she just continued to tell me, I know you think, and maybe in your past you don't think children have sex, but the truth is that they do. And it's our job to make sure that they're safe. And who else is going to do it? Because there's other people that are not going to do that. So, and that's kind of this abortion provider's view of our children. They really do believe that they're doing, at least when they describe it to you, they do believe that they're actually helping kids. But they have a very, very distorted view of children, a distorted view of humanity, the very distorted view of sexuality. And so they really bring harm is not even the right word, but they bring great harm to children and to the communities. And eventually, after years of working in that and just my own personal testimony, I came to realize that and finally quit my job after 10 years. Um, but yeah, it's a very ugly, and I know that you've, taken a deep dive into comprehensive sex education. And so, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, wow. It's just interesting, that theme of like, this is how we help people. You see
Mm-hmm,
that same thing in when women are coming for abortions. Like,
mm-hmm,
they just need help. Let's not, slightly different, because in that case they're avoiding telling them certain things, but in the case of like, they're doing this anyways, let's help them, let's make it safer, instead of offering truth. And this notion too, that should you comment on the behavior, that would be judgment. So let's just reserve all judgment and let, whatever they want to do, but we'll just help them do it safer. It's like, where would you draw the line? And it seems from their perspective, there's no line. It's
mm-hmm.
whatever goes.
Yeah, that's what I quickly learned. There is no line. They take a humanist approach to the counseling, and I know that because eventually I became, as their Title 10 trainer. Um, I taught client counseling skills, how to counsel a client when they come in to help them be comfortable,
Mhm.
share with you what they're going through so that you know how to properly give them the prevention methods or testing that they need. But in none of that is any of the behavior ever discouraged. And really, this abortion provider and just the world of comprehensive sex education, if a child comes in and they actually tell you what they're doing, um, it is never judged as something wrong. They just, quote unquote, their words, empower the child to just do it safer by reducing their risk by using condoms and lubrication and knowing how to, and again, this is a quote from them, navigate the healthcare system, which really means they teach children in the United States, perhaps they do this in Canada, how to navigate the government funded health system, because so I was a Title 10 training manager. That was Title X is a Roman numeral, but Title 10 is family planning. It's getting contraceptives, getting testing for STDs, things like that. So that program in our country is a federal program, and that money is dispersed to the states, and then different clinics, including Planned Parenthood, our largest abortion provider, use that money to provide those services.
Mhm.
So my point in saying that is that these girls as young as 9 qualify for those programs. The government pays for it, and parental consent or notification is not required.
Wow.
So the wording that's used in our country is that Title 10 provides services to women of childbearing age. So that could mean a girl who's 9 years old and has started menstruating and is sexually active. So they would consider her a woman of childbearing age. And so that's how they justify it. So it's not just the abortion provider, but it's our own
Yeah.
government that is creating a program subverting parental consent and authority, and really enabling uh, really abuse among children, because this can be peer-to-peer abuse. It could be adult, on child abuse. Whatever it is, it's a high risk behavior as well. Even if they are truly consenting with another child, it is not healthy behavior for a child. So it's
Mhm.
definitely something that we're tackling here in our country.
Yeah, wow. I'm glad you explained the Title 10 because I wasn't sure if that was a Planned Parenthood thing. So that's a government specific thing related to funding. So that makes sense. And yeah, so there was no guideline around, hey, what if this child is being abused? Like, what's our process for reporting that? It's just like, hey, this is what they're coming in for. We're going to help them with
Right.
whatever they're saying, not to report it.
Absolutely. So when you see the advertising of any organization that is promoting comprehensive sex education or abortion services, you're going to see that they talk about a person's sexual, like their human rights as far as their sexuality. And so they believe that everyone has the sexual right to sexual pleasure. And that if there's anyone who is trying to, stop that, to create a barrier of someone achieving or accessing sexual pleasure, then that person's considered an oppressor, right? They're going against their human right for sexual pleasure. And so in this case, you're seeing that for children, it's really the parents who are then labeled that oppressor, because it's always the parent who is trying to protect the child from early sexual debut.
Mhm.
They're the ones that are going to intervene. And so in my work with this abortion provider over the years, what they, and this is another direct quote from them, is that parents are a barrier to their services. They would say this often, and Monica, oh, parents are a barrier to services. And I said, well, explain, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, when we have a minor girl coming in, if her parents find out that she's coming into our clinic, we never see that little girl again, because the parents don't want her to be sexually active. They don't want her on birth control. They don't want her to access abortion. And so they basically were saying that they did everything possible to ensure that the parents never found out. So that might be they encourage the girl to use a fake name,
Mhm.
because according to this program, There isn't, they're able to fudge the client, so if she doesn't have an ID, it won't matter. As long as she's a woman of childbearing age, they can serve her. It doesn't matter what her name is, none of those things. So it was very fraudulent. Um, and we saw, as I started working with the young population, what really came out is that a lot of these kids, because they're getting this education in those communities, they trust the adults that teach them that they're supposed to have sex. They trust the adults who, that authority figure that comes into their
Mhm.
classroom or their community center who says, all right, well, we're going to learn about sex. You're going through puberty. Like, let's talk about all these things. And our children naturally submit to authority.
Mhm.
And so they're going to say, oh, well, okay, I guess I'm supposed to be sexually active. And then of course the culture is highly sexualized from music and things that they watch, so they just think this is a natural thing to do. But Jocelyn, what I found out is, as I was reaching out to teens, doing these classes, um, for example, I had this one girl, and this was in a high risk alternative school, meaning these children had been kicked out of other schools. So, they had already been in trouble. So this was kind of where they were at to get their education. And it was a mixed group of boys and girls, and they were about 13 years old. And was talking about HIV prevention, which again, I would do it in a very medically accurate way, but it's still very graphic because you're talking about anal sex, vaginal sex, oral sex, all of it. And you're normalizing it essentially. Basically, you're saying, okay, well, this is normal. This is what's expected. And this little girl raised her hand, and this was not a rowdy group. They were not disrespectful, but she raised her hand. She had a question, again, not even being disrespectful. It was a legitimate question. And I won't repeat it exactly how she said it, just because I just want to be respectful. But she essentially asked me, when I'm involved in this activity, I gag. Can you teach me how to do it better? Most Planned Parenthood or most comprehensive sex educators would say, well, first of all, are you using a condom? Second of all, have you considered using a flavored lubrication? I mean, they would really have just answered the question on technique and all, and making sure she was using a condom. I just wasn't comfortable with the fact, like I read between the lines, this little girl didn't like doing this particular activity. And I said that to her. I said, well, let me, let's talk about that. I said, it sounds like when you're involved in this activity, it causes you to respond negatively in a physical way. It tells me that you don't actually like this activity. Am I correct? And she said, you're right. I don't like it, but maybe if you teach me how to do it better, I will like it. And so then I said, have you ever considered just not doing the activity you don't like because you don't have to do it? And all of those kids, including her, just straightened up in their seats and looked at me. They did not look judged. They did not look upset or ashamed. They just kind of looked at me like, oh, we've never thought about that. And so I realized that that's what they were, that was the response. I could tell. And I said, guys, do you realize? And I had a blackboard behind me, or a whiteboard actually, and I had already listed the three ways that disease can be transmitted. So orally, vaginally, anally. And I listed on the other side the bodily fluids that transmit HIV. So they had those on the board already. And I pointed over to the side where, the sexual activity. And I said, guys, do you realize that you don't have to do any of these at all? And if you don't do them, then you'll never be in contact with these bodily fluids. And if you're never in contact with those bodily fluids of another person, you won't get HIV. You won't even get any other STDs, and you won't have to worry about pregnancy. And the little girl raised her hand again and she said, ma'am, no one's ever told us that.
Mm.
And so we're inundating our culture and our children with this message that the expectation is to be sexually active at a young age. It's what makes you special. It's what makes you mature. It's empowering. I mean, they use all these positive words, but it's slowly killing our children
Yes.
spiritually, physically, emotionally. And long term, their exposure, not just their physical exposure of, obviously they're exposing themselves for a longer period of time in their lives to disease, which is really dangerous, but that exposure of that kind of behavior slowly diminishes them, their spirit, their emotions, their hearts become hardened because they're objectifying each other over and over, and they're using each other over and over again. And the culture and the authorities, like the abortion providers, mental health providers that are talking about these things as well, even children who identify as LGBTQ, um, even they, I still protect them. Like, as a Christian, I know God didn't create homosexuality. That's not how he created us. But at the same time, I'm also saying, just because they're identifying that way or trans doesn't mean we should sexualize them. But yet the LGBTQ community wants to they hypersexualize the gay children, uh, and the trans children. And now we're seeing, and have been seeing, that now that's coming over to heterosexual children as well. But comprehensive sex education believes what Kinsey taught in the 1940s, that sexuality is on a spectrum. And so they don't believe anyone is truly heterosexual. It's just the culture has shamed people into believing that, but truly everyone is on a spectrum. All that is a lie, of course. And I have firsthand knowledge from the gay organization that I worked at and the abortion industry. Both hailed Alfred Kinsey as their father, as the father of sex education, and they just thought he was a hero for his fraudulent and abusive research that he conducted in the 40s that has really changed our mental health profession, our medical profession, our education system, and how we're educating children and family. And talking about family, when you are exposing children to this and you're teaching them that sex is just a material thing, their bodies are just material things, like a machine to be used for pleasure, then why would they think that the preborn child has any humanity at all?
Mhm.
If they've been objectifying each other over and over again, it's just a natural next step to dehumanize the preborn child. And that's really, that's a very, that's exactly what they're doing through the education, because they, through comprehensive sex education, it's very deliberate. They say, okay, you're going to be sexually active, you're going to use condoms, lubrication, and you're going to get tested because it's inevitable that you're going to get a disease. Then you'll get treated. We'll teach you how to tell all your sexual partners that you have a disease so they can get tested and treated. And when you get pregnant, you have an abortion, all at our clinic. And so now they have a client for life,
Mhm.
and children are just broken. And what does that do for their future in thinking? What do they think about marriage now? And what do they think about having a family now? Well, all that has now been destroyed as well. So this is really a deliberate attempt to not only destroy our youth, to completely redefine sexuality, marriage, and family, and to eventually just completely destroy it. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that happening actively in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, there's so much in that that I feel like we could unpack for days of just, I mean, I encourage those listening to look into Alfred Kinsey if you haven't heard of him. I know he's mentioned a little bit of the history that's mentioned in Seth Gruber's The 1916 Project, which is
Mhm.
a helpful look at things. But I remember actually in my former days before Jesus, and our listeners have, some of them have heard my testimony of just being in the LGBTQ community. But I
Mhm.
remember learning about Kinsey in a gender studies class or something, and at the time, I mean, they didn't teach who he really was, they just taught the whole spectrum thing. And I remember thinking, hey, this is great, this makes sense. Like, of course I didn't have any foundation of Christ or anything at that point, but um to then later learn who he really was and what he was doing in the studies he was conducting is appalling. And so yeah, I encourage viewers to look him up.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting, like what you're describing. I'm just thinking of, you know, the alternative, which is abstinence. And which is a good alternative. And I think that's almost like a dirty word in our culture. Like, how dare you say that word, because you are oppressing people with your, and it's tied to usually a type of religious rhetoric too, right? Like it's like, oh, you religious people and your abstinence. Um, and yet, how relieved these children were when they heard that another option that no one had ever told them was that they could just not participate in that, and that that would be a good thing too.
Oh, yeah. There's more to that particular interaction. So once I told them that, and the little girl responded the way she did, they actually started huddling together and talking about ways that they could be with each other without touching each other. And they came up with some like very innocent alternatives, like just playing sports together. Most of them were living in government housing. And so they had community centers where, the government had provided snacks and movies and basketballs and all those things. So they had access to that. And so they're like, hey, we can go to the community center and just watch a movie, and they've got popcorn. And the girl who had asked the question, she's a very tall, beautiful, very athletic kind of a girl. And she was an athlete. She loved to play volleyball, basketball. She's very good at that. And so one of the boys mentioned, hey, they've got basketballs. We can go to the basketball court and play basketball. And the little girl, the same little girl that asked me the question, got some attitude, and she said, boy, I'm better at basketball than you. I'll just beat you on that court. And he said, I know, but it'll still be fun. And so it was really sweet. But I did have one little girl pull away to the front of the class to speak to me privately. And she said, I can't do what they're doing, right? So it was the way she asked it. She's asking for permission, but she kind of really felt that she couldn't abstain. And I asked her, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I can't stop having sex. And I asked her, well, why not? And she said, because I've already had sex and everyone expects me to do it. Now I can't say no. And so we had a conversation about the fact that she can choose not to have sex. It's her right to say no. It doesn't matter that she's already been sexually active. I went as far as saying, if you don't want to have sex until you get married, you can do that. And if you never want to have sex ever in your life, you could do that. Like, this is completely up to you. And what I always notice when I have these conversations with teens like that is their little shoulders relax and they smile. And so it just creates tension in them to even be involved in this, even though they think it's the right thing, even though the words that they speak might be that they think it's cool that they're active, sexually active.
Mhm.
But once you give them permission and you really have conversations with them, you begin to realize that they're doing this for all the wrong reasons. And when you give them permission to just be kids, they relax and they're happier. And so they just ended up huddling together, talking about ways how to just be with each other that had nothing to do with sex. Now, if you were to ever look at the literature from any comprehensive sex education provider or abortion provider, they're going to say the alternative to having sex are things like this: mutual masturbation, touching each other over each other's clothing, taking a shower, but without intercourse, like with each other. These are all still sexual things.
Wow.
But these kids were saying basketball, watching a movie, eating popcorn, just being kids. So they're smarter, obviously, than your comprehensive sex educator or abortion provider. But you're right, abstinence has gotten a bad rap. Um, Perhaps a lot of abstinence education and purity culture education just didn't go the right way in the past.
Yeah.
And so, and there's also the movement of the sexual risk avoidance, which is basically abstinence, but just using, very similar to the public health message of, are you teaching sexual risk reduction, which is
Mhm.
comprehensive sex ed, or are you teaching sexual risk avoidance, which means not having sex until marriage or whenever you decide? And that still takes a secular approach because it's still about, or you can wait till you're an adult or, whatever. Of course, from a Christian standpoint, we are talking about God's creation of male and female. What is marriage? What is family? And that sexuality and intimacy, the sexual intimacy really is to be reserved for the marriage to really strengthen that marriage and to bring children into the world and raise up those children together as being the safest and most optimal thing for the children. Um, I think we have to not, I just have to not worry that the culture doesn't like that message. But it is the right message. And I think the more people that share it, I think the better.
Yeah, I agree. And we often talk about this at Redeeming Conversations, where I think sometimes because the culture has come in so strong, Christians have felt like, hey, I have this message, but like, I don't know if I can share it. And instead, encouraging people like, hey, what the Bible teaches is good, it's redemptive, it's we have a good message. God has a good message. He designed us well, He knows us best. And so we don't have to worry about, I mean, we know the gospel's offensive to people, that's
Mhm.
just the reality, but we don't need to shy away because what God's design is good, and we can be excited to share it. And I know from my having lived in very much that world, I mean yourself as well, and then coming into alignment with God's truth and just the clarity, the peace, and that's by the power of the Holy Spirit too, to even understand that, hey, wait a minute, oh, marriage is a sacred covenant between a man and a woman, and sex is for marriage, and like that's a good thing. You know, the world is selling this notion that this is freedom and empowerment, but it's not, right? People are in bondage to that, and there's consequences for it. And so what would you say, um, I mean, maybe tell us a little bit about the ministry you started, which was really a result of seeing what's not working and coming back into alignment with God's word. And how would you, what would you share, I guess, to listeners in terms of, you know, how best to address this from a biblical point of view? um, I think you've mentioned how, you know, it's got to be the parents talking with the children and bring the parents back into it, but I'll let you kind of explain a little bit more.
Yeah, well, when I finally um when God took the scales off my eyes and I started realizing what I was involved in was wrong and it was harmful, and that it was really a lie, that they're lying to people. They believe that same lie. I eventually quit my job, and I was at home praying about it, and I was very repentant because I realized that I had a natural ability for doing public education and speaking to people and all of that. It came very natural to me as a skill. But I was repentant because I thought, well, I used something, a natural gift that God gave me for evil, So I was like, you're never going to let me speak again because I look what I did, and of course God is like, no, no, you're going to use those gifts for me now, right? That's what happens. But I asked him, and it was very prayerful, and actually that whole process of being in prayer and being in his word led me to learn who is Alfred Kinsey, because I knew that that was a core foundation. That's where their foundational beliefs are coming from. Humanism as well, because we use Carl Rogers client-centered counseling skills. And he was a humanist. So I did some study there. I saw the videos of Judith Riesman, who exposed Alfred Kinsey. So those are really good videos you can watch to learn about him. You can find those on YouTube. And then he really reminded me of that quote that I told you about, that parents are barrier to service. And he really had me dig deep into what does that really mean. And of course, he took me to the book of Genesis, like start from the beginning. And here's creation. This is how I created humanity. This is my purpose here, right? And I realized in reading that and in Deuteronomy as well, because Deuteronomy encourages parents to teach their children diligently. When you wake up, when you lay down, when you walk by the way, when you sit down. I mean, he is saying you are to share my truth with your children
Mhm.
all day, every day. Now, we're not talking a Bible study, but as you do life, you are bringing God. God is with you always, and so you should be talking to your children about God. So, and his commands. So anyway, I realized that the reason that Planned Parenthood and why we're seeing, at least in the United States, maybe in Canada as well, why there's policies being created for the government to raise your children rather than parents. And so I'm seeing this in the United States. There's policies like trans bills, transgender bills that say parents are a barrier to the health care of their children because they want the government and they want to be able to say, I'm going to transition kids. Parents, get out of my way, kind of thing. So there's this huge movement to get parents out of the picture. That means this movement really is about erasing God's creation and purpose for humanity, his purpose for marriage and family. And that's when I realized it takes a family. It means that it takes a family to raise strong children. It takes a family to build healthy communities, and it takes a family to form a great nation. This is what's important. In history, we see civilizations like the Roman Empire completely destroyed because of sexual depravity. And so the importance of family and following God's ways is so important. And so why the family? Why the parents in particular? Because God has given parents divine authority
Mhm.
to raise those children. They are the most powerful and impactful people in children's lives if the parents are willing to do the job, right? To step up and take action, to not abdicate their responsibility to the government, to not abdicate their responsibility even to the church, because I really advocate for parents to be leading and discipling their children. It's not my idea, it's the Bible's idea, it's God's idea. It's not the youth pastor, it's the parents. The youth pastor is not the parent. So I'm kind of very strict about that. But not because of me, because that's what the Bible says.
Yes.
And that's what makes it more powerful, is that it's always been that the father is the spiritual leader. It's always that the mother, completely equal to the husband, also raises the children in the same, same spiritual beliefs. And so that is, we can't lose that. We need to reclaim that. We need to reclaim that. So when parents ask me to teach their kids that they'll get all their kids together, no, no, no. You have to, it's the parents that must do it. The other thing that I've learned is that we can't have the sex talk with our kids without, because if, so I want you to look at it this way. When Planned Parenthood or the abortion providers in comprehensive sex education talk to kids about sex, they speak about it in an isolated place. They're not talking about marriage. They're not talking about love. They're not talking about procreation, really, because they're really just convincing kids to abort children, um, without really talking about humanity or the value of humanity at all. So what they've done is that they've objectified sex and separated it completely from marriage and family.
Mhm.
So as Christians, we should not objectify sex and not talk to our children first about their creation, made in the image of God as a male or a female. What is marriage? What is family? The children, how are they a part of that family? What value do they have in the family? And then when it's time to talk to your kids about their changing bodies, they'll understand why sex is reserved for marriage, because now they know what marriage is. Now they know what their identity is in Christ. They know who they are as a male or a female. Now they understand, okay, I see marriage, or I've at least been educated on marriage, and I understand that. And so now when we go through puberty, oh, sex is for marriage. So you haven't separated it from God's design all by
Mhm.
itself. It's actually part of that design. And so I was a single mom for 9 years. So a lot of people are like, well, what if I'm single and I can't share, I don't have an example. Well, I was really honest with my son. It was obvious that we were by ourselves. I actually had my son outside of marriage, before I had become a Christian. And so I still taught my son what was God's best. So what is God's best? And I told him that. And I said, it does hurt that we're by ourselves. It is hard for mommy to be both the husband and the wife and the sole provider. You miss your daddy. Like, I was really honest because those were real things. I was not into lying to my son. I wasn't into making it worse either, but I did teach them God's good design. And I said, and even though we're happy with each other, it does hurt that our family isn't whole. And he agreed, because it did hurt. It did
Mhm.
hurt. So we can still teach our children God's good design, his ideal, even if we didn't live it. And so I do meet a lot of parents that say, well, how am I going to say this, teach my children about sex within marriage when I didn't do it myself? I was like, well, neither did I. But now that we know, we must live that way as God, as Christ followers. And then we teach our children that ideal, even if we didn't follow that at the beginning, because we're all sinners. We're all sinners. So
Mhm.
there's no use in trying to hide that. But we must be living God's truth today so that we're modeling that to our children as well.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. And I think that makes so much sense, like to just be real with the child. It's what we're to do with God too, right? To be real with him, to like, hey God, this hurts. This isn't how you designed it, and it's hard. And yeah, it might have been the person who's created some of that hardness from whatever sin they've engaged in, whatever it is, or not, or they've been sinned against. But regardless, it just that being real, and that I think kids do pick up on that.
Mhm,
And yeah, of course, how we're modeling it is so important, right? That we're not just talking, but we're also modeling it. And it's interesting too that it made me think of how the culture's taken sex out of context, and
mhm.
and that just seems to be such a theme of people will take scripture out of context and take different things out of context and then use it to
Oh,
be like, well,
yeah.
that's why I'm not going to believe in this, or that's why and justify it accordingly, and how important context is. So I love that. Yeah, you're bringing it all back into the appropriate context, which is God's creation, God's design in His Word, and yeah, that's really beautiful. And so are you mostly educating parents then in your ministry, or how's that working?
Yeah. And so what's exciting about this new season in my life is that for really the last 10 plus years, even though God showed me the importance of, it takes a family and just kind of what we talked about, at that time, no one was talking about sex education at all.
Mm,
And so this was around 2010, 2011, when this happened. And so I decided that I was going to start teaching the pro-life movement about comprehensive sex education and how it actually is the marketing tool that grooms for abortion.
mm,
And so I was really actively working in the United States, teaching pro-life organizations the importance of how this is happening so we can stop it, right? Get it to the core. And then at the same time, I was speaking to parents and going to school board meetings to expose comprehensive sex education. And people didn't like that because people, even Christians, like sex outside of marriage, is what I really learned. And people did not want to believe that the sex education was that bad. And I'll admit, many parents didn't they were too afraid, I think, to know how to tackle it. And so
mm,
most people didn't want to hear about it. Of course, after COVID, so many things came out. And then once the transing of children came out, I think parents are much more willing to hear and have been much more willing to hear and fight against comprehensive sex education today. So I
yeah.
say all that to say that I now feel that I'm in that new season where I can focus just on teaching God's truth and really focus on what we just discussed, which is
Hmm.
not taking sex out of the context of our creation, and that really we need to talk about our full creation and not just this one aspect. And so I'm doing that now. I've had probably my best opportunity to do that with Answers in Genesis. And so
Mm,
I shared my testimony in 2024 at their women's conference. And then in 2026, in April of 2026, the women's conference will be talking about biblical sexuality. So I'll be sharing that message that we just talked about at that conference. So if anyone wants to go, it will be phenomenal. The I cannot wait to meet some of the other speakers as well. It's a really good lineup of speakers.
yes, I second that. I was looking that up after you told me about it, and it looks great. I'm gonna try to make it myself, but
Oh,
that's awesome. And yeah, and so your ministry is called It Takes a Family.
yeah, it's called It Takes a Family. You can find me at ittakesafamily.org or monicacline.com. It'll take you
Thank
to the same website. And what I have in the works is a children's book because a lot of parents just don't know what words to use.
Yeah.
But I like to be very relational, and I'm not really into video workshops. So I thought it would be really great to have a children's book that's modest, that's really positive about God's truth, that a parent can read to their kids, and that way they now have the words to speak.
Mm,
And the kids are learning at the same time, and not being plopped in front of a video with a speaker. It's
mhm.
like that's just not very relational. I really want them to interact with each other, and I want the book to be modest enough so that the children can pick it up and refer back to it and be reminded about what is my identity, how was I created, what is marriage, what is family, even if it's doesn't look like that in your family at the time. It's creating a legacy for the future.
Yeah, I love that. That I feel like we can always use more children's books because there is a lot of
Yeah.
debatable content out there right now. So thank you. I'm excited for that. You'll have to let us know when it's published and we'll be happy to share it with our viewers and our network here. And thank you so much for coming on today and chatting with us. This has just been so eye-opening. I hope this has been, yeah, the same for the listeners. I just find this all so fascinating, and I just praise the Lord for his work in your life, and his leading you back to him, and now that you can be a champion for his good truth and his way. And I know that there's going to be much fruit that comes from that, and there's always fruit when we follow the Lord and follow in his way. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. And you were such a blessing as well. I think we're both kind of on the same path of sharing God's truth from a broken past, and that redemption is amazing. So,
Yeah.
all to
Amen.
glorify Him. So, thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Amen. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and definitely do check out Monica's website. And yeah, she's got a lot of good stuff on there, and we'll put the info in the caption and show notes too. But yeah, if you have any questions or if anything we shared you don't agree with or you want to talk, you know that we love having conversations. So do leave us a comment, and we would love to get back to you. Thanks, everyone.